Good morning. As many of you have heard through the international news and media, a very historically important document was just signed 48 hours ago by a coalition of nations. And a particular individual who has identified himself as a spokesperson for this coalition. And a peace covenant was just signed 48 hours ago with Israel and her surrounding nations. Here we are, early 2023, and we have just endured, as most of you know, a war in that region that was on a biblical scale. And it finished, and this particular individual came on the scene. He has the support of about 10 different Islamic nations that are bordering and surrounding Israel. And they have come to a historic agreement with this individual heading up the coalition. And Israel has just signed a peace covenant, a 7-year peace covenant with this individual and these nations, that Israel has the right to exist. And so right now, there's a lot of celebration going on in Israel. There's a new sense of peace. There's a new sense of security in the nation of Israel. And in fact, the entire world, to a certain degree, has taken a big breath of air and are quite impressed with the wording and the strategies of this particular individual. He has come forward and has offered a multifaceted solution to Israel and the surrounding nations. Israel, as an example, is about ready to initiate building their third temple. You're going to see Israel go back into some of her traditions. And this was all made possible by this particular individual. The reason I'm a little bit incognito, my name's Pastor Snodgrass, and it's because I'm trying to stay low, out of the scene. I haven't been answering my phone. My phone has been ringing off the wall for the last 48 hours. People have been texting me and emailing me and trying to reach me on Facebook and every way possible. My wife and I even had people drop by our house, people from the church. And I'm just trying to stay out of the scene. I've let the word out that I'm on a bit of a vacation. I've taken a few days off, and so I've told my board and that I can't be reached for the next couple of days, that I just needed a few days of rest. And so I'm really trying to stay low. We're keeping the doors locked, the lights are off, and we've got the car packed, and my wife and I are going to slip away for a few days and just give some thought to the events that have just happened in the last 40 hours. The concern from my church and all the members at my church, and even beyond the church, I've had other pastors try to contact me. There's been a lot of communications coming out of our district office as to how we are to handle the situation. And the situation I'm referring to, of course, is that this signing of this peace covenant, this 7-year peace covenant with Israel, just happened, as I said, 48 hours ago. And the church has now come to the realization that we've remained here, that we're still here to witness this particular signing, this particular event, and it's got the church quite alarmed. As you know, I've got to be very careful how loud I speak here, but for the best part of 100 years, our denomination and other denominations of the evangelical bent, we've been telling our congregations for 4 or 5 generations now that the rapturing of the church happens prior to the signing of the peace covenant with Israel. And, we've never backed down. Others came out with what they call new revelation, where the scripture was showing them that, in fact, the catching away of the church probably happens later in the tribulation time, that God will remove us from the time when he pours out his great wrath on the world, but that we would suffer at the hands of the Antichrist and Satan in the early parts of this 7-year tribulation. Well, we stuck to our guns, and we stuck with the pre-tribulation rapture, and we were pretty adamant about it. And then when the war started just a few months ago, and it's been clearly identified as the Gog-Magog war, and Israel took quite a hit, but how miraculously, it must have been God's hand that saved the nation of Israel in that case. And now we have this consortium, this political consortium that has come out of nowhere. And these nations who are normally enemies of Israel have banded together with this particular individual who has proposed and, as of 48 hours ago, signed a 7-year peace covenant with Israel. Well, I'm telling you, folks, that's a lot of trouble for us. That brings a lot of problems for the evangelical church here in North America, because we were adamant that the catching away of the church happened prior to the signing of that agreement, because we know that the signing of that agreement, according to Daniel, is the trigger that starts the 7-year tribulation, which is broken down into 2 parts. At the midway point, this particular individual is going to do some horrible things, and he's going to gain some incredible powers. And Jesus talked about the last 42 months of the 7 years being the Great Tribulation. And we know that we're going to be here for part of that. Jesus told us we were going to see the revealing of the son of perdition, which is the Antichrist. And we've now seen the first part, and that is the signing of that peace covenant. And that we would be around for the great apostasy, the great falling away in the church. And as the different events of the 7 years rolls out, including, and not the least of which, is the mark of the beast, it's pretty clear to us right now that there is going to be a great falling away. Some people have expressed that they feel God has forgotten them, that because the pre-tribulation rapture didn't happen, because the signing now of that peace covenant is like 48 hours in our rearview mirror, like we're past that point. So because that didn't happen, there's a lot of people questioning whether or not God is going to deliver on the rest of his promises, and maybe we've made a mistake, and maybe some will decide that this isn't where they want to go. And as you know, a lot of churches are right now going into various doctrinal ideas that are way off from what the scripture originally said. And so the fact that this has been a huge failing in our eyes, why were we taught this? Why did I teach it so many years? Because I believed it, and I didn't want to change it. I didn't want to, yes, and I came to understand a few years ago that maybe there was a more likely path, and that, yes, scripture wasn't all that supportive of a pre-tribulation rapture. But you know what? It was just too tough to. And I thought it would upset a few people, and I just didn't want to upset the apple cart. But now I'm really in a bit of a panic, because I've got to come up with a solution. I've got to tell them why the pre-tribulation rapture didn't happen, and the fact that it's now hit so many ministries and churches across North America. I mean, practically every television evangelist and every YouTube pastor, I mean, they're all backtracking like crazy. And, there's new prophecies coming out, and how we misread the Bible, and we're okay. It's still going to happen. That if it happens in the next year, it's still considered pre-tribulation rapture. But none of that lines up with the Bible. And that's the problem I have. I don't really have an answer for all the people in my church who've been writing and phoning me And I just don't know what to say to them at this point. So I just want to leave this with you. I'm not sure when I'll be back. This is Pastor Snodgrass. I'm not sure when I'm going to be back giving you any answers. I need a few days to go sort this out. I've contacted a few, pastor friends and even our own fellowship. And like, what do you want us to tell the people? Because they're talking about several generations have basically been told this, and it's not the truth, and it didn't materialize. And so, wherever you are and whatever you believe in, like, don't give up the faith. I'm sorry, this is what we taught you. And I mean, man, it's just something hard. We don't know quite yet what to tell them and how to keep their faith strong. And even as I think about it, there's people in my church that I know that are going to walk away from this whole thing because they felt they were lied to. It was maybe the largest delusional lie we've ever, maybe perpetrated in the church. And I see a lot of people leaving feel like we failed them somehow. So, uh, God bless you. Don't try to reach out to me. I'm really not taking any calls or any text messages or anything at this point. Um, this is the Sunday after the signing, and to be honest with you, I'm completely stumped as what to say to the people. I've run out of ways of encouraging them anymore. So take care. I've got to get going. Bye bye.